And I do really love so much of Joseph Campbell's wisdom that he's gleaned. Basically, he studied and analyzed myths and folklore and stories from all over the world, from all different traditions, basically for millennia throughout human history. And he discovered in his studies that all of these stories that we were telling for millennia just through an oral tradition, right? That so many of these stories contained universal concepts and universal characters. And this is what he formulated into what he calls the hero's journey. And what's really interesting is that most of movies and TV shows that we watch follow this exact format. And in fact, when I was studying creative writing in school, our screenwriting professor, she didn't call it this, but this is what it was. She told us, here's how you write a screenplay. And years later, when I just stumbled upon Joseph Campbell and his book, The Power of Myth, I was like, oh, this is screenwriting. This is how you write a movie, right? If you follow the formula. Now, of course, there are many authors, novelists, and screenwriters who break this formula. And I think that's really exciting too. So it can work either way, but it is fascinating that this is in some ways this archetypal template that so many of our stories throughout human history have grown from. That's the soil. So we'll get to that. But I just wanted to start with this quote from Joseph Campbell, which I did include in an email to you all today or 2 days ago. He says, mythology is not a lie. Mythology is poetry. It is metaphorical. It has been well said that mythology is the penultimate truth. Penultimate because the ultimate cannot be put into words. It is beyond words, beyond images, beyond that bounding rim of the Buddhist wheel of becoming. Mythology pitches the mind beyond that rim to what can be known but not told. And this is another quote by another fantastic author, Sophie Strand. She writes, myths are like air, invisible until you realize you live inside of them and thrive or die according to their limitations. When we hear the word myth, we think of heroes and battles, but patriarchy is also a myth, as is heteronormativity and capitalism and human supremacy over the rest of nature. Civilization is a myth, and it is within these imperceptible yet encompassing narrative structures that we now find ourselves stuck like flies in a spider's web. But myth, when it is consciously created, can be a powerful way of coming back into dialogue. We cannot return to the folk traditions of our distant ancestors, but we can reclaim myth as a way of rooting back. And so really this is your invitation for this evening to reclaim some of your personal mythologies through creative, compassionate exploration, through storytelling. And there's this other kind of play on the word story, which is restorying or restoring, right? If you call back an experience that you went through, a really challenging experience, let's say, when the landscape of so many years has passed, you can look back on that difficulty, even though it was hell, it was living hell to go through it. There is this gift of distance, of time and space, right? That you can recall the challenges and you can actually make meaning out of them and you can restory them. You can look at it from this narrative framework. And by no means am I trying to like diminish the hardships that you've gone through. In a sense, it can actually be a very healing way to look at your experiences, right? As Sophie Strand said, you know, when we think of the word myth, we often think of like, oh, the Greek myths and so forth. But myths are not just ancient, dust-covered or abstract concepts. And in fact, you have likely used mythic language already to describe your life, or at least moments in your life, right? A lot of us will say, maybe not using this exact language, but like the dark night of the soul. That's an archetypal moment. embarking on a new adventure or a chapter in your life. That is like the first stage in the hero's journey. There's this call to, as Joseph Campbell refers to it, the call to adventure. Sometimes that adventure might be really small or really big. It might be mundane. It might be wonderful. It might be something you're resistant to. A lot of protagonists don't want the adventure. Have you noticed that in movies? They're really resistant. They're like, no, I don't want to become the, like, you know, the great hero that will save the planet or whatever. Because there's struggle involved. That's what makes a good story, unfortunately. And also there's a, you know, another archetype. If you've been in a situation, usually following the new adventure or the new chapter in your life in some capacity, you feel like a fish out of water, right? When you've entered into, maybe you moved to a new city or a new job, a new relationship, a new situation. Fish out of water is actually one of the screenwriting gimmicks. Gimmick is not the right word, but one of the templates that a lot of screenwriters use is the fish out of water scenario. And we see that in so many of the stories that we take in all sorts of mediums. The main character gets thrown out of their status quo. That's what makes it interesting. That's what we want to follow along with. Usually we don't watch movies where it's like, okay, the hero wakes up, makes coffee, takes the subway to work, works at the desk, and goes home, right? Like even reality TV is like throwing wrenches every which way and making them fish out of water in different scenarios, because that's where the friction is. And where the friction is where the plot is as well. So this is a somewhat rudimentary drawing of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. The Hero's Journey starts with that call to adventure. In screenwriting, this is known as the inciting incident. This is where, right, like Gandalf comes to town and says, Frodo, you got to leave the Shire. I know you don't want to, but you got to, because there's a mission for you, right? Like that's the moment where it happens. And then we embark on this journey, and there's a threshold involved where you're leaving the known and entering into the unknown. And I know for many of you here too, you are also seekers of some kind. Many of you are yoga teachers. And so even just in this one capacity, this one experience in your life, you could probably supplant your yoga journey onto this wheel, right? Whether you're a teacher or not. What was that moment where you were like, oh, this is pretty cool. And you know, next thing you know, you're taking a 200-hour training. You're like, this is changing my life. This is like rearranging me inside. That's what happens on the hero's journey, right? And there are moments of turmoil. There are moments of difficulty. There are challenges. There are usually also mentors and helpers that we meet along the way. And then there is that moment, and you know that moment in the movie, right? It's that where things look so bad for our main character that you think, oh, there's just no way. How are they going to get out of this tangle? The odds are stacked against them, right? That's known as the abyss. And this is actually considered the death and rebirth cycle. Metaphorically, Joseph Campbell says often in myths and folk tales throughout the centuries, interestingly enough, different cultures from different countries, thousands of miles apart, use similar imagery to represent similar narrative moments. And this moment where the main character is transforming usually involves water. It's like they have to cross a river, right? And this water is said to represent the unconscious mind as well. So there's this moment in your journey where you step into the depths of the waters of your unconscious, and you come out then the other side of the river, this proverbial river, changed. And some hero's journey formats refer to the top half as the ordinary world and the bottom half as the extraordinary world. But I didn't find that appropriate for our exploration tonight, because the whole goal of creative writing is to make everything extraordinary. There you go. So the gifts of where you come from will inform where you're going. And it's not about denying where you're from. It's about exploring it with compassion and kindness. And so these are examples, right, from different movies and TV shows of the hero's journey, right, where we see the hero gets kind of roped in to a new adventure. And oftentimes, again, there's resistance to it, or they really don't understand what they're getting themselves into, as most of us can never understand what we're getting ourselves into. And the next 3 weeks also really follow this hero's journey format in a lot of ways. But the tricky thing is for us is that our lives are not so neatly structured that they fit into this mythological mold. How nice and predictable that would be. Wouldn't it be great if, like, when you were in the middle of a hardship, you could be like, oh no, I know that this is the second out of 3 obstacles, because in most writing, there are always 3 obstacles that the protagonist goes through. And the third one I'm going to get right. So I'm only at the second one. Second obstacle, no problem, right? Like, life isn't predictable like that. However, in the art of crafting your real life experiences in creative writing, we infuse narrative and scene and characters and setting into the past, thus mythologizing it. That's actually what my teacher, Ira, would always tell us when we were writing nonfiction. You know, that's the art of nonfiction writing. It's not just sharing what happened to you, it's sharing what happened to you in a way that has been molded using basically the art of fiction, using the craft of storytelling to restory your experience, to restore your experience. And viewing your life experiences from this mythic lens can be profoundly helpful in processing, digesting, and making meaning out of those experiences. This can be very healing. Plus, creative expression can just be really fun and inspiring. So let's go ahead and start at the beginning. What a perfect place to start. The roots of your personal stories, which are grounded in where you come from. And as I said, home is complex, but the art of writing about homescapes begins in the details. All strong writing is in the details. And again, those of you who've done writing classes with me before, you know that the foundation of powerful, evocative, memorable writing is imagery. And homescapes are like a great way to enter into this. So we just talked about like the really broad, mythic lens. Now we're going to distill it down with a telescope and go into the nitty-gritty. And this is where your writing will begin. Because setting is not merely just scenery against which like stuff happens, the action takes place. Setting is essential to creating the unique particularity of the world that you are recreating on the page. When you think about where you're from, why don't you recreate that world on the page? As a writer, your choice of details directs the reader's experience and understanding of the places that you have inhabited. So thinking about food, neighborhood, dialect, slang, or region. So feel free to take out your notebook, or if you want to type, you certainly can. But I recommend handwriting, and let this be messy. These are drafts, right? This can just be notes. Start jotting down whatever feels most inspiring to you here. Like, what was the cuisine? What were the foods of your childhood? What did you eat in your home? Or like, what was happening in your neighborhood? What were people eating? I grew up in New York and New Jersey, right? So like instantly I think of Sabrett hot dogs, not just any hot dogs, Sabrett hot dogs from the cart in Manhattan, you know? Food is really a gateway for powerful sensory writing. And of course, like at first you might just like list out the foods, but then you could go back and get deeper and more detailed, like the aromas, the ingredients, the way things are prepared reveals so much about a culture and a people. This is why like travel cooking shows work, right? Anthony Bourdain and so many others have had travel cooking shows, because yes, it's about the food, and the food is about the people and about the culture and about the place. If you want, next week, same time, same place, same channel, I'll be back, and we'll kind of take the next stage in the hero's journey. Looking at basically the moment where something shifted in your life. In screenwriting, we call it the inciting incident. In a romantic comedy, that's the moment where the two characters like bump into each other on the street, and one of them is holding a stack of papers, right? And they fall. That's the moment. That's the spark, right? Maybe it was the moment you realized, like, I'm going to walk into this yoga studio for the first time and feel pretty weird about it, you know, or whatever it might be. So please email me. Let me know if you have any questions. If you would like to share any of your writing, I would love to receive it. It can be totally messy. It can be riddled with like grammar errors. But if you feel like, you know, I put together a little online zine for everyone who's participated. If you, yeah, feel called to. And this weekend, I will have the replay ready for you, as well as this handy dandy PDF that I keep talking about. And yeah, I would love to see you guys next week. Yeah, it is so good to access a little creativity. Thank you all so much. Thank you guys. Great to see you.